In this one, we're going to talk about a free pack of node groups that you can get from my Gumroad shop. It's been available for a little while now, and I thought it might be fun to show people how I like to use them. Once again, they are free to download, and you can find a link in the video description. If you want to support me, consider buying something else from the shop or donating a few bucks when you download something free. Alright, let's get started. So here I am in Blender version 2.93. Unfortunately, screencast keys is not working, so you're not going to be able to see my keystrokes for this one, but don't worry because there's not a whole lot of shortcuts and things like that going on. I'd also like to mention that I am using the Node Wrangler add-on. You can find that by going to Edit, Preferences, and under Add-ons, you can just search for Node Wrangler right here, and you can just make sure that this is checked, and you'll be able to do all of the things that I'm doing in this video. Just so we have some objects to use these node groups on, I'm going to bring some objects in with Shift A. I'll bring in a plane, a UV sphere, and Suzanne the monkey right here. And next we're going to append all of the node groups. So you can do that, go to File, Append right here, and navigate to the file if you downloaded it. Once you find it, you can just double click on it, and you can either append all of the node groups separately over here, but what I like to do is just append the material right here. And before you hit the append button, just make sure you check fake user like that. Unless you do this, all of the unused groups will disappear when you save your file. And then when you go over to materials right here, you can see we have Joey sees node groups as an option for a material. So I'm just going to put that on the sphere in the middle. Obviously you can't see anything happen because we're in solid view mode right here. I'm just going to switch over to the shading tab. And now you can see we have all of these node groups in here. I'm just going to make sure that this material is on all of our objects so we can preview it properly. I guess let's just get started with the first one. We have these, I call them value compressors, but they're really just like map ranges basically. And you can use these the same way that you would use a color ramp or a map range, except you control the midpoint instead of the maximum or minimum values. So to show how I like to use these, I just have a principled BSDF shader right here. I'm just going to turn the metallic all the way up so these look like metal, and we can turn the roughness all the way down, and these are just going to look like mirrors basically. I like to use noise textures for roughness map, so you can just plug this noise texture in directly to the roughness like that. So what the value compressor does, you can just select it and hit Alt-P to take it out of the frame like that. I like to use these, just put it in between the noise texture and the roughness map like this. You can control the transition between the smooth and the roughness with this spread right here, like that. So if you make it really small, it'll be really sharp like that. The center value is going to adjust the distribution. So right now this is 0.5. So there are kind of like equal spots that are smooth and equal spots that are rough. And if we move this, it'll be either more rough like that or more smooth. The 2 min and the 2 max, you can use that to adjust like the maximum and minimum roughness. So if I turn this up, the smooth part is no longer completely smooth. I can just make these closer together to make it look a little more natural. What I like to do with the noise texture is turn the detail all the way up, and you can turn the roughness up pretty high like this, and it starts to look really grungy like that. It's a node group that I ended up building over and over again, so I just ended up saving it to a file so I can append it and I don't have to rebuild it every time. Right now it's just these 2 nodes, and this is looking pretty complex. What makes this nice is that when you move the center value, it's like kind of like using a color ramp, except you're moving both of these at the same time, and then the spread right here is controlling how far apart they are. And you can see we also have a clamped version and an unclamped version. And that's basically just if you want to have values that go below 0 or above 1, you might want to use the clamped one. I figured I'd include that. And by default, these are using linear interpolation. And I don't have a way to change that in here, but if you really do want to change that, you can just select the node and hit tab to go inside of it. And there aren't too many nodes here, so it's pretty easy to see that the map range is doing all the heavy lifting, and you can just come in here and change the interpolation like that. If you want to learn more about the map range and the color ramp, I made a video about that recently, and you can find that in the description below, and I'll also put a little pop-up right here. Alright, so next we're going to talk about these distortion nodes, and these are my favorite ones and the ones that I use the most often from this group. I do also use these in some of my other videos. Specifically, there's one called something like Easy Distortion, something like that, and I use these for displacement. And it's really fun. You can check that video out. I'll put a link for that in the description and also a little pop-up right here too. So you can see we have some noise distortion, and these are basically just using a noise texture to drive the distortion. And I also have some using Voronoi textures. And you can see right here there are 4 different types. We have Euclidean, Chebyshev, Manhattan, and Minkowski. And these are just the different types of Voronoi options that were given for the texture. So the directions say to put these between your texture coordinate and your texture. So for this example, I just have a checker texture on our plane, and we just have the texture coordinate over here using the object texture coordinate. It doesn't really matter which one of these you use. This node will work on all of them. So I'm just going to take this noise transform distortion and bring it over, and you can just drop it in like that. And I don't know why, but it likes to connect the color to the vector. You're supposed to connect the vector to the vector like that. And you can see immediately this is distorting quite a bit. You can change the strength with this top value right here called XYZ strength. So if you set that to 0, you'll notice no difference at all. And if you move it up slightly, you'll see how it starts to distort like that. And because this is a 3-dimensional texture on like a 2-dimensional object, you can see the Z values are starting to like come through and kind of mess it up. If we look at the sphere, it makes a little more sense what's going on because it's distorting the Z values right there. You can just kind of mess your textures up a little. This is why I showed it with the checker texture, because it's normally very clean, and this is a way to add a little more like variety and randomness. And if you know how to use a noise texture, you'll see that all of these values right here are also in here. And we have the added W that comes with the 4-dimensional texture. And this basically lets you change the pattern. It's like it changes the randomness seed. And then we have the scale, so you can scale it up to get more like fine distortion like that, smaller details. You can turn the detail up to get it like more noise in there. It's not as smooth. Roughness, distortion, it works just the same way as the noise texture. So you'll notice there are a few other options in here. If you try to move these, you'll notice like nothing will happen, and that's because there's a switch right here that changes from moving in each direction basically when you use this. And when you switch to individual, you can decide if you want to just distort only on one axis. So, I can distort only on the X axis right there. And you can see that these lines are getting messed up, but these ones right here are still straight like that. And we also have these lines right here, which are still straight. This will work nice for our plane because we can just avoid using the Z strength. So you can see if I use the Z strength, the checkerboard texture going up and down kind of makes it a little weird, but we can avoid that if we use the individual override right here. And we also have these other outputs that let you use this like you would use a normal noise texture. We have the factor, and you can see when I preview that, it's just a regular noise texture, and we also have the color option too. So if you wanted to, you could like use the factor for a roughness map while you're distorting the checkerboard texture, something like that. One thing that I really like about these nodes is you can pile multiple on each other like this. So if you want to, you can duplicate this and just put 2 in a row. Just make sure that the vector is actually plugged in and not the color. So now you have one that's like a larger texture and it's just making really big changes, and the other one is small details. Another way that I really like to use these distortion nodes is with some displacement. So for this, I had to switch to cycles so you can actually have shader displacement. I talk about this in my distortion video also, so you can check that out if you want a more in-depth explanation of how to do this. But basically for this, I'm just plugging a noise texture in to make this displace, so you can see that it's wavy. And when I turn the strength up for the distortion, you'll see that it'll start to add a lot of noise in here. And it looks even cooler when you double it up. So when you start using this for displacement, you can get some pretty complex results. I think they look really cool. So next we should talk about these other Voronoi distortion nodes. So I'm just going to take the Euclidean one over here and just bring that over. Once again, make sure you're using the vector. And you can see just when we preview this without distortion, what it's doing, it's breaking things up in a very sharp way. And that's because I have softness turned all the way down. So you can decide if you want this to be, have sharp edges like this, or if you turn softness all the way up, you'll actually get all of these will be connected. They'll be smooth like that. And once again, you're going to get all of the options that you would normally get with a Voronoi texture like that, including all of the outputs. And you can also output the distance, color, and position to use this like a regular Voronoi node. So you can see we have the Euclidean one, which is smooth. And we have the Chebyshev one right here, which is probably my favorite one. It's the one that I use most often. It has more of like a technical kind of look to it, much more square. Manhattan is pretty similar. And here we have Minkowski. So yeah, definitely experiment with piling these up on each other and using them for different things. Alright, so for this example where I show the difference between the scale and the transform distortion, I'm just using a spherical gradient texture. So we have this circle right here, and I'm giving it a hard edge with this greater than node like that. And it's in the center of the plane because I'm using object coordinates. So when I use the transform distortion, the one that I was showing you before, you can see when I turn it up high enough that it distorts going kind of like this direction diagonally, and it doesn't go evenly in all directions. So this is why I included the scale distortion for each of the nodes that I made, is because when you're using scale, it's always distorting away from the center point, the 0 point, or if you're using object coordinates, basically away from the origin point. And you can see that when I distort this, it's distorting in all directions evenly, basically away from the center like that. And there are just certain instances where having it distort evenly just from the center makes more sense. And we have one of these for each of the Voronoi distortions too. This is the sort of thing that also works really well for volumetrics. So right now I have this running through a principled volume shader instead. And when I distort it, it'll distort evenly in all directions like this. And you can get some pretty cool cloud shapes. My favorite nodes to use to make clouds is the Euclidean distortion. You want to make sure that the softness is all the way up and you start getting these kind of like round blobby shapes like this. And it's pretty stylized, kind of cartoony, but I think it looks really nice. And then if you put a noise scale distortion before it and turn that up, you can give it a little more irregularity so it's not perfectly smooth. Make it something like this. And when we're using this on a checker texture, you can see that it really does come from the center, because when you turn it up really high, the edges start to get blurry, but right where the center is, stays pretty clear. So this next one we have is called the input color ramp. I tried to make this basically like a color ramp that gives you the option to have 10 different colors like that, except you can control all of the positions and colors with an input like this. It works like how you would expect a color ramp to work basically, and this works the same way. So you can plug this in and make sure that the factor is plugged into the value right here. Right now we have quantity, so it's using all 10 of these colors. So if you want, you could just use 2 like you would a normal color ramp, and then you're going to control the positions right here the same way you would control the positions of these. So position 2 we'll set to like a little past 0.5, and we can crunch these together. This will look the same exact way as if you did that with a color ramp, but you can change the quantity. So if you turn this up to 10, and I'll just put these back to where they were before basically, and you can control which colors you want to put in here like this. So this might make more sense with something like a gradient texture that normally it'll just go from 0 to 1 right here. So you'll actually be able to see all of the different stops in here and how they work. And you know what happens if you change them like that. And you can move the positions around, but you want to make sure that they go in order from smallest to largest, or else they might break. You can see it kind of like overwrites some colors if they overlap. You want them to go in order from smallest to largest. So similar to the input color ramp, we have this one called the multiple color mixer. And this works pretty similar. Again, you want to plug your textures into the value for this. And you can see it's basically cycling through all of these colors right here. And you can change these to whatever you want. And they have a little input slot too if you want to reuse colors. For instance, you could plug in just like an RGB node to any of these if you want them to all be the same color, things like that. So what normalize does, I like to have this set to 1 by default. It basically makes the first color and the last color be 0 and 1. And this makes it good for using textures like this, because you can see the gradient texture. It starts right here. This would be a value of 0, and this would be a value of 1. So you can see when we have normalize turned on, when I have this set to 0, it's showing the first color, and when I have it set to 1, it's showing the last color. And anywhere in between, we'll just cycle through all of those colors in between. And obviously the first and last color depends on this quantity right here. So if I set this to 5, a value of 1 becomes color 5 right there. When you turn normalize off, value will work like you're just selecting these colors. So we have this set to 1 right now, so it's choosing color 1. If we have this value set to 5, it will select color 5 right there. And you can just basically type in whatever color you want. Something like this could be cool for if you want to switch between a bunch of different images or something like that. So you can see I have an image plugged into color 1 and an image plugged into color 3. So to switch between those, I can either change the value to 1 or 3, and it will just switch between those two. And obviously you can use up to 10 different images or colors or textures or whatever you want. And so this is pretty similar to the input color ramp, except these are all just distributed evenly instead of being able to control their position. And you can get some pretty cool results by plugging textures into the value slot. You can see right here, it just makes it all rainbowy, and you can change whatever colors you want in here. And you can even plug images into the value also to get some pretty cool effects. And last, we have this node that I like to call the Pixelator. And it says right here, put between texture coordinate and texture. So for this example, I'll start with just a noise texture. You can see right here, we have a typical noise texture, and I'm just compressing it with my value compressor. And what you want to do with the Pixelator is plug the UV vector and the window vector in like this. And you can switch between which one you're using with this bar right here if you want to switch back and forth. So then you can plug the pixel vector right here. And you can see as soon as I do that, this starts distorting right here, and it's all pixelated now. So you can see these aren't exactly square. And also when I move it, the texture actually kind of just floats. It looks almost like a screen or something like that. And that's because we have this set using the window vector right here. And this is really good for if you want to use a camera, and if you zoom in close enough, it'll just fill the screen like that. And this is good for if you want to render an image more pixelated or something like that, you know, or use this like a filter. So obviously if you don't want that, you just want to move this to UV. And then resolution, you can control how pixelated you want it to be. So if you turn this up higher, you know, you'll have smaller pixels, or you can make this really low and it's very pixelated. So my favorite way to use this is with images. So I'll just remove this noise texture and we can plug the image in. So you can see when I'm using an image right now, it's squashed. And that has to do with the width and the height right here. Basically, whatever size your image is, you want to put in right here. And this helps with the aspect ratio. So I know that this is a square image normally, so I can just either make both of these 1, it would be like a 1-to-1 ratio. Or if I want to be actually accurate, I can just make both of these 1080 because I know this image is 1080 by 1080. And you can see you might get some strange artifacts. That's because we have our image set to linear. If you set that to closest, that'll clear up. So now we can take a look at these snap values, and like the description says, it's going to change how many pixels there are on each axis. So you can see when I do this, it's making the pixels longer on the x-axis like that. And this gets really fun when you start plugging textures into here, and you can get some weird results. So I can just like take this noise texture and plug it into the X snap, and it'll start giving you some like really weird distortions like that. And if you use like a math node, and I'll just set this to multiply, this will kind of let you control the strength of the texture. So if you have this set to 0, it'll be unaffected. And you can turn it up slowly to add a little more distortion. And you can get some interesting kind of like, almost like a mosaic effect. And obviously you can change the scale to make it just, you know, be whatever shapes you want. You'll see that we have this other output that's called tile vector. And when we plug that in, it might be hard to tell what's going on, but if you zoom in really close, you can see that each pixel now has a little pizza on it. And it's basically going to take whatever image or texture you have and just tile it. So this is the sort of thing that is pretty cool to use with like I have a spherical gradient texture right here. And so I can just make this polka dot grid right here, and it's all just tiled. You can plug whatever you want in here to tile it. Even like a noise texture right here will tile if you want that for some reason. I've been having a lot of fun with the Pixelator, and if you've been following my videos, you'll notice that because I've been using it in a lot of my viewport compositing videos. So here's an interesting thing you can do. So I still have the spherical gradient set up with a greater than, so that there's just a circle in the middle of each tile like that. And you can use the value output of an image and use that as the threshold. And when you look at it, it'll kind of create this like halftone pattern right here. And if you don't like the effect that it's giving you, you can throw in a contrast node right here and kind of just mess around with it until you get a value that looks good to you. So yeah, if you're creative with the Pixelator, you can make some pretty cool things. Since I've made it, I've been finding a lot of uses for it. Alright, that's it for this video. I'll add more node groups here and there as time goes on. If there's a node setup that you use all the time, mention it in the comments. People might find it useful. Alright, thanks for watching, and have a good one.